Hi, this is Terry from Tree Marie Soapworks. Today I'm going to be showing you a little bit about SoapCalc. A while back I asked in one of my videos if anybody would be interested, and I got a lot of responses. So I'm going to show you how to put a recipe in and a little bit of background on the little areas that you have to fill in. So let's get started. SoapCalc is actually found at soapcalc.net, and when you go to soapcalc.net it'll look like this. And then you just go to recipe calculator, and then each one of these sections has a number by it, and you can click on these numbers to read a little bit of background information about each of the areas. So this one explains a little bit about sodium hydroxide and potassium hydroxide. Normally you're going to use sodium hydroxide, and that's the default, and this is just if you're going to use bar soap, where it's about liquid soap, and we're not concerned with that. So we just keep it as the default of NaOH. And then this one, I usually use ounces. A lot of people may use grams. Actually, my recipe, when I make my soap, I use grams, but it makes more sense in my head, being here in America, to use ounces because I know those amounts. So I keep this at ounces. This number, when you're entering a recipe from somewhere else, you're not going to necessarily know this number, or you will get this number by putting in all the values. So you don't really need to know this number. This is the weight of the water. What I didn't know when I started making soap is that the water doesn't really matter. It's not like it has to be a set in stone thing. I wish I would have known to discount water more than I did at the beginning. This number 38 is very high, and it's normally just used for hot process, but if you look here, it says that the simplest way to determine the amount of water used in your recipe is this way: water as its percentage of oil, which I normally use this way, water as a percentage of oil, but it says it's recommended that beginners use this method and use the default value of 38%, and that's really, really high. A lot of times recipes you'll find on the internet, like say Brambleberry, when I was figuring out their recipes and putting them into SoapCalc, a lot of their recipes they use 33, so 33 just became my standard number here. But as I learned more, I learned that when you lower this number, your soap comes out better. It comes out more creamy, less grainy, less glycerin rivers. So the higher this number is, the more glycerin rivers you tend to get. This number right here, as a percentage of oils, is going to be, so this would be 38% of 16 if this was your total number of oils. So your weight of oils, and then it takes that percentage. So normally my recipes are 25, but if you're new, you might want to start with 33 and just kind of work your way down. I go down as low as 20%, but I usually don't go any lower than that. Here you can also use a percentage, and I don't normally bother with that, but I'll show you it when we go to the recipe, that it'll show the percentage, and you can start to get familiar with those values as well. This is a ratio, and some people use ratios. So my 25% usually ends up being a ratio of 1.8 to 1 lye. For the water to lye ratio, you can use as low as 1 to 1. In a case that you would do that is if you're adding, say you're adding milk or beer to your soap, but you want to just use water to dissolve your lye. So you want to use the least water as possible. And then to make up for that amount that you normally use, like say it's a difference of 2 ounces, like from the 1 to 1 ratio to whatever you normally use, you would use that 2 ounces and make it up in milk or beer, and you would add that to your oils, your melted oils. So that's the only case where I would use 1 to 1 ratio. Otherwise, it would set up extremely fast. It would cure fast too because there's not a lot of water to evaporate out of it, but it's something for more advanced soap makers. This section right here is your superfat. If you have 0% right here, it means you shouldn't have any lye left over. Your oils should neutralize all the lye, but you got to leave a little room for air. So we always superfat our soaps. They do 3% once in a while, I see, when you really want a lot of bubbles. but more standard is 5 or 6%, or I see a lot of 8% and 10%. But just keep in mind that the more you superfat, it's going to be more moisturizing, but it's also going to weight down the bubbles more. So you got to just find your balance of what you want to do here. Okay, so the fragrance, they figure that fragrance per pound of oils. Most manufacturers, they suggest their fragrance per pound of soap. So in this case, I just zero this out, and once I figure my amount, I will just manually calculate that later. So I'll show you that in the next screen. Okay, for this section is all your oils, and we don't need to get into too much depth here, but if you want to know different characteristics of different oils, you can see it gives you the value of one oil right here. But then when you do the recipe, it'll give you the value of all of them. And just for your own information, these top 4 right here are your saturated oils, where they're going to be your hard oils. And these bottom ones are your unsaturated, or they're mono or polysaturated oils. They're usually your liquid oils. But all of your liquid oils, like we have avocado oil that we put up here, they all do have a little bit of hard oil in them. They're not all made up of completely liquid oils. Like your olive oil has, let's see, I'll show you olive oil. It has palmitic oil in it as well, and a little stearic. So that's why when you put it in your bowl, you can still see streaks until it kind of melt. The streaks are coming from the palmitic and stearic acid. So that's just a little background on these, and you'll understand this more as you start to make your own recipes. But right away, this doesn't really need to mean much to you. Okay, so this section is when you actually make your recipe. And I picked a random recipe from the internet, and I'm just going to put this in with you, because most of the time recipes will not tell you what their water percentage is or any of these numbers, or they won't tell you what superfat they used. This you could figure out just by adding up the oils, but you don't have to, because you just put them in here and then they'll add it up for you. This random recipe I picked from the internet, I'm just going to show you how to put it in. Okay, you're not putting percentages in, you're putting the actual amount. So you change it over to ounces. So for the first we're going to add in all the oils. So first oil we have is olive oil, and you can double click, or you can click it and then plus plus to add it in there. If you don't like it, you can subtract it out. So we're going to do double click olive oil. Next is coconut oil. Coconut oil is usually it's almost always the 76 degree. I've never actually seen it in 92 degree. So that would be your coconut oil. Next is palm oil, and then palm kernel oil. So palm oil, palm kernel oil, and I use the flakes. And after that we have sweet almond oil, which is under almond oil sweet. And the last one is mango butter. Mango seed butter. Okay, so now we'll put in the amounts. And we have, I'll just put in the amounts real quick. 30, and you hit the tab to go to the next one. 15, 9, 6, 3, and 3. Okay, so we've put in everything we need to put in. Now we'll say calculate recipe. And then it updates, so it has all of your amounts over here now. And it has your ratio over here, but we'll show you that on the next page. So you say multiple tabs and then view or print recipe. So now this is where you make your recipe. You would put your name of the recipe up here, and then you would put your additives down here, and then a little instructions, things you want to remember. And then after you're done, I would add some notes too of what went good, what didn't go good. You could track down why things happened. So I want to make a little note on this. Your saturated to unsaturated. The saturated are the hard oils, so they're going to be the ones to set up quicker. So if you look at this number right here and this number, these are, it's out of 100. If this is higher than 50, then it probably is not a good recipe for swirls. So you can always look at this, look at a recipe that you found on the internet, and depending on what you get right here, it's probably not going to be good for swirls if this number is higher than 50. It just will set up faster. So that's something that it's always good to know. Okay, this value right here, your INS value, I don't hear many people talking about this as to what it means, but I read in a book, an older soap book, that this value right here is supposed to be near 160. This number being near 160 is usually a good soap, but not always. If you're doing just a 100% coconut oil soap and you superfat at 20%, your numbers are going to be way off right here. Nowhere near, I think it ends up being high. Also, if you're doing a Bastille soap where you're high percentage of olive oil, that ends up changing this where it's still a good soap, but the numbers, the INS numbers don't come out good. Okay, so another thing we want to talk about is we put these numbers in and look how big our batch is. This is for a 5-pound mold. So we want to use it for our mold that's smaller. So I'm going to show you how to change it to your mold size. Well, first, before we do that, let's figure out our fragrance, what percentage of fragrance they use for this. So they use 4 ounces. So we can figure out that by just dividing 4 divided by this number right here. So let me do that real quick. So 4 divided by 91.9, and that is 4.3%. So we'll just say 4%. So just remember that they used 4%. So when we go back to adjust our recipe, we will use 4% fragrance. Okay, but one thing we didn't look at is these numbers right here. They don't give these numbers when they give you recipes on the internet. So, well, they do give you the water, but you don't know what percentage they used. So I figured this at 25% as a water as a percentage of oil weight. Well, they used, their amount of water was 22 ounces. So we know that their percentage was higher. So we just gotta kind of guess until we get it. Also, the lye. Well, let's do one at a time. Let's figure out the water. So we'll go over here and I'm gonna guess 33 because normally that's a good rule of thumb that a lot of people use. So we'll try 33. And then we'll just calculate again and view again. So okay, here we can call this 22 because they round to. So this can be 22 right here. We'll call that good on the water. But the lye, they used 9.5. So actually we probably used the same percentage, 9.5. So they used the 5%. So now that we've got their recipe figured out right here, we know their water as a percentage of oil, and we also know their super fat. We can change this recipe size to our size. So we go back over here, and if we know the amount of oils that we normally use, we can put that in here. Well, first we have to change it to percentage. So this is their numbers. Now we know their percentages, so we change it to percentages. Now it will let us change this number right here. So if you haven't used SoapCalc before, you might not know your total weight of ounces, but in the past, just look up a recipe that you've used for that same mold. And like for my mold, my 10-bar mold, I always use 33.5 because that's what I normally use for my mold. So now that we know all of this stuff, we will just say calculate and view. And so this would be our new recipe. Although, see, I know that mine normally says about 45 or 46 here. It's because I don't normally use this much water in my recipe. So I want to go back and fix that. So my recipe, I usually use 25 right here. And that will fix that amount. and make it closer to what I normally use. Then I'll figure my sodium lactate next, which is really easy. So sodium lactate is 1 teaspoon per pound of oils. Well, this figures your pounds of oils. So my pounds of oils are 2.1. So it's easy to figure. It would just be 2.1 teaspoon sodium lactate. So then next would be your fragrance. Remember we figured out they use 4% fragrance. Now I usually use 5 or 6%. You want to make sure that you can use that high of amount. You need to check the IFRA number for soap. For this one they use just 4%, so we just need to figure out what 4% is. So you just take this number or this number, or mostly I do both because I always use the grams when I'm actually measuring out the ingredients. So I'll just use grams. So we have 1323, and then you just do times 4% or 0.04, however you want to do it. Okay, so it would be 53 grams. I'm just putting fragrance oil. And then you want to note what percentage that was that I used so I can see it easy without having to figure it out. Okay, and then next you would put your colorants down here. We're not going to get into that today, but just this is for your additives. So say you're using clay in this recipe, and clay's recommendation is for 1 teaspoon per pound of oils as well. So then you would just use this number again. Say it's a half a teaspoon per pound of oils. That's another easy one to figure out because you would just use half of this amount. Just having this figured out for you makes it a lot easier. I think I've covered most everything that I wanted to cover here. I would just put your title up here and your ingredients here. And then here I would just note what swirl you're doing. Like if I'm doing the Taiwan circling swirl, I'm going to divide it up by 3. So just say divide batter by 3 and just put all the notes you want to know. Like I always force it through gel on the heating pad. I'll usually note if I put it on medium or high, and then later I write how long I had it on high. I can put too how long I had it covered up. Here in Indiana, it's humid. Every time I uncover my soap before 2 days, I always wish I had done it for 2 days. It just seems like it always comes out better. But other places, if you do a good water discount and you put your soap through gel, sometimes they cut it in 6 hours after. So it really just depends on how much humidity is in the air. So you can just note things like that and kind of figure things out just by taking good notes. This sheet then I print out. So you can say print recipe. Your print dialog box will come up and you can either print it or you can save it as a PDF file. And when I print these, I'll just put my recipe number and it prints the date on there already. But if I end up making it a different day, I'll just cross that out and put the new date on it. And I keep it in a binder and just keep all of my recipes. Even if I do the same one again, I just want to make notes on how I usually tweak it a little bit. So I want to know what I did different. So I'd have a new one of these. So I hope this helps you out, and if it's confusing to you, you can let me know what questions you have, and I hope you have a good day. Thank you.